Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. I never imagined that one sentence could instantly end a 4-year relationship and an 8-month engagement. But that's exactly what happened. My name is Tommy, and this is the story of how my fiancée's ultimatum about her parents' mortgage made me realize I was about to marry someone who saw love as a transaction. It all started in the summer of 2020 at a mutual friend's housewarming party, where I met the woman who became my fiancée, Stephanie. Stephanie had moved to our city the previous year for her job, and we ended up talking on the back deck that evening while everyone else was playing beer pong inside. There was something immediately appealing about Stephanie. She had this infectious enthusiasm when talking about things she cared about. At 24, she seemed mature and focused in a way that impressed me. I was 29, established in my software engineering career, and ready for something serious. We started dating regularly that fall. Stephanie integrated well with my friend group, and I got along great with hers. By the following summer, she was spending most weekends at my apartment because I have a bigger house. The relationship felt natural and stable. We talked about future plans, what kind of house we'd want, and how many kids seemed reasonable. Stephanie was incredibly organized, almost obsessively so. One thing I noticed throughout our relationship was that Stephanie worried about money more than seemed normal. She had a decent marketing coordinator salary and no major debt, but she'd frequently mention her parents' financial situation. Usually, it came up when they couldn't afford family vacations or had to skip expensive gatherings. By our 3rd year together, I started seriously considering marriage despite having this unease about the relationship between my girlfriend and money. As I got closer to my 32nd birthday in April 2024, something clicked. I'd always said I wanted to be married before 35, and Stephanie and I were compatible in all the other ways that mattered. I spent weeks planning the perfect proposal. Stephanie's 28th birthday was coming up in April, and I knew she'd appreciate something personal rather than flashy. I planned a picnic with all her favorite foods. The ring was a classic solitaire, elegant but not excessive, exactly what I think she'd love. When I got down on one knee at our favorite lookout point, Stephanie's face lit up exactly like it does when she's excited. She said yes before I even finished the question, and we spent the rest of the afternoon planning our December wedding. That was the beginning of what should have been the happiest 8 months of my life. Instead, it became a masterclass in recognizing emotional manipulation. Wedding planning started immediately. We set the date for December 14th, giving us 8 months to organize everything. Stephanie dove into the details with her characteristic thoroughness, creating spreadsheets for guest lists, vendor contacts, and budget breakdowns. My parents offered to contribute $12,000, while Stephanie's parents couldn't assist financially, but I never thought deeply about it. I handled most of the major expenses without complaint, believing I was in a position to do so. The venue deposit, photographer's retainer, and catering down payment, I put it all on my credit card and paid it off each month. Stephanie seemed constantly stressed about money throughout the process. As she claimed, her money was used to handle a family problem she never fully discussed. When she asked if I could increase my contribution to cover some extras, I agreed without hesitation. During this period, I got to know Stephanie's family much better. Her father was 55 and had recently taken early retirement from his insurance agency job. Her mother was 52 and also retired. Stephanie also had a younger sister who was 25 and worked as a freelancer. Stephanie's family seemed nice enough, though I sensed some underlying financial tension. Stephanie's anxiety about money seemed to increase after spending time with her parents. To relieve this anxiety, I never asked her to do anything with her money, but this does little or nothing. Around June, Stephanie had told me more details about her parents' financial struggles. In late 2022, they decided to upgrade from their modest 1,100 square foot ranch house to a much larger 2,400 square foot 2-story home because the mother wanted something bigger. I have no problem with her mother making such a request, but she should have considered the money coming into the family first. The monthly mortgage payment had jumped from $950 to $2,850, a threefold increase that seemed manageable when Stephanie's father was working full-time. However, his early retirement in 2023 had made these payments challenging. Their combined pension barely covered the new mortgage, utilities, and maintenance costs for the larger property. Stephanie worried constantly about her parents potentially losing the house they'd worked so hard to afford. I felt sympathetic to their situation, but there was nothing I could do because I had my own responsibilities to carry. I took Stephanie's concerns at face value, assuming they would figure out how to sort out their family debt. But something happened 4 months before our planned wedding date. Stephanie's family was hosting some sort of family event, and Stephanie had invited me weeks earlier. I was looking forward to it, as I'd only met a few of her extended family members at previous smaller gatherings. The event was held at Stephanie's parents' house, which was really impressive. I could understand why they'd wanted to upgrade, even if to me, it looked like a financial mistake to get a bigger house with no plans on how to cover the mortgage. About 20 family members attended this event. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and I felt genuinely accepted by Stephanie's extended family. The atmosphere was festive and warm, exactly what I'd hoped for from a family gathering. However, as the afternoon wore on, I noticed some concerning undercurrents. About an hour later, Stephanie's mother pulled Stephanie aside for what appeared to be a serious conversation in the kitchen. I couldn't hear the details, but I could see them through the window. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and when Stephanie emerged, her entire demeanor had changed. The rest of the afternoon, Stephanie was noticeably withdrawn. I asked if she was okay, but she just said she was fine, just tired from socializing. I attributed her mood to the exhaustion that often comes with large family gatherings. We left around 7:30 in the evening. Stephanie had mentioned earlier that she needed to get home at a reasonable hour because she had an early morning assignment at work. The 20-minute drive to her apartment started normally enough. I thanked her for including me in the family event and commented on how welcoming everyone had been. Stephanie stared out the passenger window and gave minimal responses to my attempts at conversation. This wasn't like her. Stephanie was usually eager to dissect social events afterward, analyzing conversations and sharing observations about family dynamics. About 5 minutes from her apartment, I could tell something was seriously wrong. I asked what was bothering her. She said nothing was wrong. I pressed gently, saying she seemed upset all evening. She shook her head and said it was nothing, remaining quiet for another minute before finally turning to look at me. We were stopped at a red light about 2 blocks from her apartment complex when she finally opened up. If you loved me, you'd pay for my parents' mortgage. For a moment, I couldn't process what she'd just said. Stephanie continued staring at me, waiting for a response, while my brain tried to calculate the implications. $2,850 per month. $34,200 per year. That was more than half of what many people make in a year, and she'd presented it as a test of my love for her. Not a request for help, not a discussion about family obligations, but an ultimatum disguised as a romantic gesture. She knew all about the responsibilities I already had, but yet wants to add her family's financial mistake to it? I just nodded and said okay. I couldn't trust myself to say anything else in that moment. The rest of the drive passed in complete silence. When I pulled up to her apartment building, Stephanie got out with a quick goodbye, and I drove home in a state of shock that I can barely describe. That night, I sat in my apartment trying to process what had just happened. The more I thought about it, the more disturbed I became. This felt like emotional manipulation, pure and simple. The phrase, "if you loved me," was designed to make me feel guilty for any response other than immediate agreement. It implied that my love for Stephanie could be measured by my willingness to take on a massive financial obligation for people who weren't even my in-laws yet. It suggested that questioning the request or asking for more details would be evidence that I didn't care enough about her or her family. I started thinking about other instances throughout our relationship where Stephanie had used similar tactics. When we were planning our honeymoon, she'd mentioned how someone who really cares would want to pay for the entire trip rather than splitting it. When I'd hesitated about upgrading to a more expensive wedding venue, She'd said that most fiancés would want the best for their bride regardless of cost. At the time, I dismissed these comments as normal relationship negotiation. Now I realized they were part of a pattern of using guilt and emotional pressure to get what she wanted. The mortgage ultimatum was just the most blatant example of a manipulation strategy she'd been using throughout our relationship. I couldn't sleep that night. By the next morning, I'd made my decision. I called the wedding venue first, then the caterer, photographer, and DJ, canceling everything for months before the event meant losing most of our deposits. Next, I called my parents to explain the situation. They were shocked but ultimately supportive, though my mother worried about my emotional well-being. I assured them I was making the right decision, even though it hurt. My father, who'd been married to my mother for 35 years, said something that stuck with me. Son, if someone uses love as leverage, they don't understand what love actually means. By evening, I blocked Stephanie's phone number and social media accounts. I also blocked the rest of her family. I changed the locks on my apartment since Stephanie had a spare key, and I removed her from my emergency contacts at work. I was preparing for the inevitable confrontation, and I wanted to control the terms of engagement. By the next day, I got 15 calls from blocked numbers. I also got worried texts from close friends asking what had happened to the wedding. Stephanie showed up at my apartment demanding answers, but I never opened up. I told our mutual friends that the engagement was off, and I didn't want to discuss the details. Most of them respected my boundaries, though I could sense their confusion and concern. I thought I'd successfully avoided confrontation until Thursday morning. I arrived at my office, grabbed coffee from the break room, and was settling in at my desk when the receptionist called my extension. "Tommy, there's a family here asking for you. They say it's urgent." My heart sank. I took the elevator down to the lobby and found Stephanie and her entire family sitting in the waiting area. They were dressed professionally. Clearly they'd planned this intervention carefully. They stood up as soon as they saw me, and her father immediately started talking about needing to understand what had happened. I remained calm but firm. I told them this was my workplace and not appropriate for personal discussions. When they insisted on just a few minutes to talk, I reaffirmed that they had to leave. That evening, they were waiting by my car when I left work. Stephanie's sister called me heartless for abandoning their sister without explanation, accused me of leading Stephanie on, and demanded I honor my commitment to marry her sister. I got in my car and drove away without engaging in conversation. This same scene repeated over the next several days. Sometimes they waited at my office, sometimes at my apartment building, sometimes at the grocery store I frequented. They were persistent to the point of harassment, and I realized this cycle needed to end before it affected my job. On Friday, Stephanie showed up at my office for the third time that week, demanding to see me. I knew I needed to end this definitively. That weekend, I sent her father a text, the only communication I'd initiated since the breakup. I told him I would meet with them once. After that, any further contact would result in harassment charges being filed with the police. I sat across from Stephanie and her parents in my place. I had prepared what I wanted to say, and I delivered it calmly and factually. I explained exactly what had happened after the family reunion. I described Stephanie's ultimatum about the mortgage payment and why I considered it emotional manipulation rather than a reasonable request for help. I clarified that Stephanie knew the financial responsibility I was already carrying, but chose to throw hers at it. I told them that healthy relationships involve discussion, negotiation, and mutual decision-making. They don't involve ultimatums disguised as tests of love. She'd chosen to use guilt and emotional pressure to manipulate me into taking on a massive financial obligation. Using the phrase, "if you loved me," was specifically designed to make me feel like refusing would prove I didn't care about her. That's not how people who love each other communicate. While I explained, Stephanie remained defensive. She argued that asking your partner to support one's family in crisis was normal and expected. She said she'd thought I understood the importance of family loyalty. I responded that family loyalty and emotional manipulation were two different things. Framing this as a test of my love revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what healthy relationships look like. The meeting ended with her father apologizing for the office visits and acknowledging that they had never asked Stephanie to approach me about the mortgage. That had been entirely her idea. Stephanie left, still arguing that her position had been reasonable and that I was abandoning her family in their time of need. I felt closure after that conversation, even though Stephanie clearly didn't understand my perspective. Her parents accepted my decision to end things, and I never heard from any of them again. But the experience taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation tactics and trusting my instincts when something feels wrong in a relationship. Looking back now for months later, I have absolutely no regrets about my decision. The red flags were there throughout our relationship. I just hadn't recognized them for what they were. Stephanie's views should have alerted me to her transactional view of love. Stephanie, according to mutual friends, still maintains that I was wrong to call off the engagement. She believes that supporting your partner's family is a basic relationship requirement, and she can't understand why I saw her request as manipulation rather than love. This tells me everything I need to know about whether I made the right decision. I learned that when someone shows you who they are, believe them. When Stephanie said, "If you loved me," as a way to manipulate me into a major financial commitment, she was showing me exactly how she viewed our relationship. Love, to her, was measured by my willingness to sacrifice my financial security for her family's benefit. Real love doesn't come with ultimatums. Real love doesn't use guilt as a weapon. Real love involves honest communication, mutual respect, and shared decision-making. The woman I thought I was going to marry didn't understand any of those concepts, and I'm grateful I discovered that before walking down the aisle. Sometimes people ask if I ever wonder what would have happened if I just paid the mortgage. Would we be happily married now? Would her family be grateful? Would everything have worked out fine? But I know that giving in to that first ultimatum would have just taught Stephanie that emotional manipulation works on me. There would have been more demands, more tests, more "if you loved me" statements designed to guilt me into compliance. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be manipulated. Sometimes protecting your own emotional well-being requires disappointing people who claim to care about you. And sometimes the person you think you know best is actually someone you don't know at all. I'm grateful for that red light conversation in August, as painful as it was. It saved me from years of manipulation, financial stress, and emotional abuse disguised as love. Most importantly, it taught me to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, even when everyone else thinks I should just go along with it. If you're ever in a situation where someone uses "if you loved me" to pressure you into something that makes you uncomfortable, pay attention to that feeling. Love doesn't use guilt as motivation. Real love is patient, understanding, and respectful. It involves honest communication and mutual support. It doesn't demand financial sacrifice as proof of commitment. And it never, ever uses emotional manipulation to get what it wants. I learned all of this the hard way, but I learned it before it was too late. And for that, I'll always be grateful that my fiancée showed me exactly who she was before I made the biggest mistake of my life.